Stu, I'm not a very good conversation partner, man. I interrupt, I'm belligerent, and, arrogant cultural leanings. Sorry, man.
No, not at all. Yeah, yeah.
The stuff you're
Yeah.
into, though, man. I mean, Stu, talk to me because talk to me about this because I've been thinking about it, but like, I've just been giving myself a pass on figuring out how to engage in my community over these many months. Because either one, I'm making somebody nervous because of COVID, or I'm breaking some law or rule or boundary, um, or I just don't want to do it because I'm nervous about it. But like, how do we go about joining the mission of God, except in the very basic and simple things that just hold together each day, in in the settings that we're now finding ourselves in with the constraints that we have.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I think like you, COVID, I think that the COVID has robbed us of a lot of things. Some of those things are things we've taken for granted. Some of them are privileges we've had and enjoyed that the rest of the world doesn't enjoy, that we mourn the loss of. So there's some good losses in this. But I think COVID has probably done the most damage to the ability to uh, to be in the life of people in a more meaningful way. And I think in order to be participant in kingdom work, it's always about relationships. It's always about proximity. It's, I feel that that's probably more how the kingdom is expressed and lived out, is when we can, life brushes up with life and relationships develop. And so I think there's something about COVID that is teaching us that we've been designed to be in relationship and community with other, and the idea of distance is such a dangerous thing. Both historically, whenever people create enough distance between them and others, it can be filled with all kinds of hatred, lies, ignorance, and you don't need COVID to do that. But certainly, the idea of a pandemic pushes us even further aside. But I think there's a few things. So I'm processing this as a pastor of a community of faith, and there's a few things that were thrown my way in my reading that I'm still chewing on. But I think it has relevance to beyond, church ministry. One of the quotes comes from a person in a different tradition that I'm not gonna. Yeah, I'll just say this. He says the reason we mission is necessary is because worship is absent. And one of the things that he talks about is the fact that when people are attuned and worshiping God as they ought, that becomes witness. That becomes the way in which the world is drawn in to the glory of God, to the plan of God, to the purpose
This
of
sounds
God.
like James K. Smith.
It could be, but that's not who I had in mind. But I think there's two things that I think are critical that has to be redeemed from what we have made it. One is worship, and the second is, and talking about the narrowing of our vision. That I think we need a broader vision of what it means to worship, and two, we need a broader vision of prayer that is not anchored in a um, in again a narrow view of the work of God. Prayer is so essential because what it does is it reminds us that, one, the work to which we are called, we can't do on our own. We need God's help. But also prayer that is shaped by the heart of Jesus Christ changes how we think and how we interact with our world, how we see what we see. I think, to put it bluntly, and this is just me being anecdotally more, but what we pray about reveals our perspective of God and the world. And, to anchor ourselves in more the prayers of Christ, and so there's the Lord's Prayer, right? That we all know well. But the other instruction, the only other place in the Gospels where Jesus teaches people to pray is when he has this interaction about the harvest. And, he says the harvest is plenty, but the laborers is few. And then Jesus says to disciples, pray this prayer. Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out more, right? And so that's the only other place in the gospel where Jesus actually gives an instruction with an actual specific, this is what you pray for, this is what you ask for. And we've emphasized the Lord's Prayer, which has, that kingdom ethic in it, but we've often not emphasized this idea of being a sent people, a people that pray that God would empower us to be. So prayer is not just this kind of seeking from God to get for my life, but prayer is about praying that I become the means of blessing in the world. I become the means of God's plan being extended in the world. And how many times do we actually pray that prayer? And I think we've even theologically reformed Jesus's prayer to be about us. Father in heaven, hallowed be thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And we emphasize different aspects of the Lord's Prayer that again limits the scope of what Jesus is talking about, inviting us into. So anyway, I'm saying a lot there, but to maybe wrestle it down to the ground, what does this look like in daily life? I think true worshipers live attractive lives because their worship is expansive and it reaches into every aspect of their existence. It is reflected in what they value. It's reflected in the choices and decisions we make. It's reflected in the relationships we have with one another. And so true worship actually becomes, I think, a means of witness. And so when we again narrow worship to a Sunday morning experience, when we narrow worship to just about how I feel and whether I like the music, when we put words on people's lips that is just about ourselves, we are shaping a Christianity that has no vision beyond its own gratification. And we are conditioning our people and our churches to think of Jesus as their savior, but not as Jesus as the gift of life to all of creation. And so then, so that's anyway, that I process a lot of what I'm reading in conversation with you guys. When I do process it with you guys, that's when I'm able to articulate it. So you said a few times,
but Stu, you read it, but you think at a whole other level. To be able to verbally process what you've read the way that you do, you're not trying to sound like you know what you're talking about. There's just absolutely no arrogance. It's a humble heart. It's just, it doesn't sound like you're processing. It sounds like you've really been dwelling on these things, and now they're welling up from these places that they just can't stay there because they're bursting out of you, and we get to be the benefactors of that. That's what it feels like when I talk with you, man. I really enjoy it. I feel smarter. I feel like I'm a little bit better equipped for the day after I get done talking with you, because I'm like, yeah, I just learned something. I didn't even have to do all the hard work.
I appreciate you saying that. I would say that the place where the rocks need to be moved or dislodged for me is beyond the conversation into life and practice. And I'll put it to you this way, and perhaps you feel the same tension, is that I've been in too many places where I've been taught the right stuff. But the whether it be a lack of courage to live this way, or a lack of or fear that if I live this way, will I be okay? Will I be taken care of? Will my family be taken care of? Or quite frankly, if I led the church more strongly away from ourselves and into the ways of God and the kingdom, would we lose a lot of people in the process of desiring to follow in the ways of God?
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question there.
Yeah.
So what happens if you lose a lot of people? I mean, it's not like you lost them. It's not like you neglected them, and so because you neglect, they're when you say lost, I'm imagining it's people get disgruntled and upset, and so they leave and go someplace else because they're not hearing what they want. They're not getting their ears tickled.
Yeah. First, let me say, I think, I've learned over the years of being a pastor that some losses are necessary losses. They're good losses. Jesus experienced, not 100% retention in followers, right? Like, there are those who go, I'm out, I'm not with you, or they start well, but they don't want to go all the way. So, I think it's idolatrous to think that any church, can retain all its people, because, uh, people are going to respond to the calling of Christ, and sometimes they not, and I think that's just the reality. I what I'm talking about is when the gospel becomes bigger than the individual wants of people. That's when you see why people are even in the church. And that sounds brutal, right? But that's true. And you, as a pastor, and this has been me being very candid, people pay the bills, right? They pay my salary, they pay for the building, they pay for, I mean, I'm just being very, very honest with you. So you do need people to be a participant in the church, to keep the church as we have developed it in the world from operating. But when you start to think in terms of the great expanse of God's calling, I think we're talking not just about changing an aspect of how we do church. I think we're talking about reconfiguring the way the whole system is set up.
Yeah.
We're talking about something that no longer can become the focus of our energy and resourcing, so that we can actually be free to focus and resource the work of God in the world and through the individual people and the community of faith in ways that extends beyond our comforts and our programs and our staffing and all of that. So when I say what I'm saying, I'm not just simply saying, I get up on a Sunday and I'm preaching the kingdom and saying stop being selfish and think about God's work. I'm saying a renovation of what we ultimately think we are supporting, to and to be able to make the changes that needs to be made. And here's what I would say. This is the last thing I will say on this. My biggest fear is that I won't walk down that road. And I don't think I can afford to not do that. And I don't know what that means, just frankly. I really don't know what that means.
You don't think that you can afford not to walk down that road?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
No, you don't need to apologize. I'm just clarifying that I heard you with what you intended, because because
no, that's true.
I grasp the gravity of what you're presenting there.
Yeah.
But have a full expectation of my friend and my brother and fellow pastor, that you'll be obedient to where the Lord shows you to put your step, where to take the next step towards. We never do it all at once. It happens in small steps. But when I look at the at the possibility of what that one step could entail, that's when fear begins to sneak in, and I start going, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I want to do that. It's not that I can't do it. It's, I don't know if I want to do that. And I want to say to you, that it's not that bad losing your job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Stuart, probably the last part of this conversation here, I'm just going to stop the recording now, because